Welcome to another episode of Building Wealth Strategies podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Constantino, and today I'm super excited to have on as a guest TJ Visiodei. Welcome, TJ.
Hey there, how are you?
So let's just jump right on in, TJ. Well, before that, let me introduce you. TJ is formerly a neuroscientist. Is that correct?
Yes.
And a three-sport NCAA athlete at John Hopkins University. So, what sports did you play?
I was a football player, I was a lacrosse player, and a track and field athlete at Johns
How about
Hopkins.
that? And now you're the founder of Axe Decentralized Real Estate and the author of a new book that you're super proud to talk about: Wealthy Doctor Secrets, the fastest way to build wealth on a doctor's salary, period. So welcome, TJ.
Thank you so much for having me, man.
All right. Well, let's just jump right on in and talk about your background. So where have you been and where are you coming and what's new with TJ?
Yeah, so I just wrote the book Wealthy Doctor Secrets, and in the book I talk about the story of how I was able to help my father build his portfolio from nothing. A little bit about my background. We just covered the fact that I once went to Johns Hopkins University. I was in neuroscience. I wanted to become a doctor, but I left last minute because I recognized my top strengths. They were in number one, psychological analysis, and number two, critical analysis and reasoning. So I was about, I looked at my scores, I looked at everything, and I thought, okay, I could be a doctor. I could be pretty good. My two of the scores are literally perfect scores on the MCAT, like physically perfect scores. And then the other two, they're all right. They're like 80th percentile. But if I were to just cut out those other two things and just focus on those top two things, I could really double down. And what that looks like is entrepreneurship. Like entrepreneurship is understanding people's psychology and is applying critical reasoning to people's psychology. So you fast forward a little bit, I made a huge bet on myself in entering the world of marketing. And after working with a bunch of different clients, I'd actually worked with my father's private practice. Ultimately, what we were able to do was we were able to turn his practice into the number one rated practice in its specialty in the state of Florida. And in having done that, my father was able to go from having an average doctor's salary in his specialty. Like he's a pediatric gastroenterologist. So that median is about $193,000 a year. He was able to earn $1.2 million a year, him and all of his partners. Now, that is right before we start the book itself. Okay. When we start the book itself, we're starting when we were actually celebrating the fact that my dad had crossed the $1 million a year mark. And I'm asking him how he's feeling. And he's like, I'm completely stressed. I can't sleep. I'm getting anxiety attacks. I'm getting raised blood pressure. I'm about to have another heart attack. He'd already had a heart attack 10 years before that. And the question was, what was going on? Why? I mean, I'm like sitting here going like, Dad, like you just made it compared to everybody else. What is going on? And we talked. And the fact is that he was in the middle of a divorce with my mother. And that divorce proceeding, she made it where there was a clause where he had to pay for whole lawyers in addition to everything else, in addition to the huge payout, which was an all cash payout, meaning that he is 63 years old with $0 in his bank account. He wants to retire in the next 4 to 5 years. And he's like, I have no idea what to do. I don't know a single thing about finances. I don't know anything about finance whatsoever, not even a little bit. And that's why I'm tossing and turning. And so the book is the answer that I gave to my father to save his life because he was literally going to suffer from another heart attack if we didn't get this done. He was working too hard. He was so stressed out. He had no clue what to do. He was so focused on medicine, so focused on being the best doctor possible. He didn't even once read any book ever on any seminar of any kind in finances ever. He just thought, well, I'm doing well in my career. I'll just do it. So what do you do for a man in that situation? That is what I answer in that book. So that's kind of my backstory. That's kind of how we got to now.
Well, let's go ahead and unpack that. So let's back up to the marketing before this crisis. So
Yeah,
you
let's do
started
it.
helping out with marketing. So what did you do as far as marketing to help out the practice?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So essentially, my father had made a deal with his partners to acquire the practice that was once his employer. This is a huge, huge, huge company that in that year had done a roll up of over 36 different pediatric gastroenterologist offices. So my dad was really going against the grain to buy back the office IP from that employer. That meant that they each had to put in somewhere around, at the time, 9 months salary each. So they literally made a deal. We're not going to get paid a single thing, not a dime, for the next 9 months, each one of us, for the rights to this practice. Okay. So when he'd inherited that, they also stripped out everything that they had. So they stripped out the website. So there was no website. There was the phone number was the wrong phone number. The business address was the wrong business address. And the office hours were the wrong office hours. Okay. And so I'm there. I'm helping out other clients. I worked with like meditation teachers. I worked with health coaches. I worked with a golf clinic. I worked with fitness instructors. All these different things. And my dad was like, TJ, we need help. We need serious help with this. And I'd avoided it for a long time, but ultimately I decided, okay, I'm going to actually work with you. And the strategy that I used is actually very similar to the investment strategy that I present in the book, Wealthy Doctor Secrets, which is a strategy that is based off of something called the 80-20 principle. So what did we do ultimately for my father? Well, what we did was I recognized the 80-20 levers that I could pull to make sure that his practice was making more than anybody else, despite having 1/10 the budget of everybody else. So what are those things? Number one, we made it so that his practice was appearing at the top of every single Google search related to the topic and the specialty that he's in. So anybody in South Florida that puts in vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, endoscopy, anything related to pediatric gastroenterology, they're going to see my father's practice first. That's number one. Number two, we made it so that we ran offers to the most profitable things. So if you can imagine it, my father's office, when we started, it was like every $50, that's another patient, right? Every $50, another patient. But there's different patients with different conditions. Some conditions are $200. Some conditions are worth $3,000. I found the conditions that are worth $3,000 over the course of a year. And I doubled down on those things. The third piece of the puzzle is that then I came up with a new campaign that essentially made it so that customers left more reviews than they did for anybody else. So if you were in Florida and you look up pediatric gastroenterology or any one of these other terms, I made it so that my father's practice came up first, and he was a 4.9 out of 5 with over 315 reviews. And the next best would be a 3.5 out of 5 with maybe 30 reviews. If you're a parent and you want the best treatment for your child, it's a no-brainer who you're going to go with. You would feel bad if you went with a 3.5 and then your child ended up sick, right? So that's ultimately what we did. And that's my company, that's Private Practice Profits. But in doing that, we were able to grow and grow and grow because of the STAR principle and the fact that essentially 80% of customers, 80% of attention, 80% of all resources flowed into my father's practice.
That's fantastic. There's so many businesses that I know and a part of that they don't focus on just those three key aspects of getting our name out there. You know, that's the SEO, the search engine optimization, the reviews, and then I really like how you're saying just focus on the big dollar item. That's the 80-20 principle right there. Focus a little bit, that gives you the highest returns. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah. So, ultimately there's this one neat aspect of it. It's a play out. It's like how things come out with the 80-20 principle, that when you're in a given market niche and that market niche is growing and you are the number one business in that given market niche, as long as it's growing by 10% per year, the growth for that business is exponential. It's insane. It's hard to even describe. They're numbers that are mind-boggling that you don't hear about in typical investing. Like people are used to like a 12% from the S&P 500. I'm talking about 50, 60, 70, 80. It's absurd percentages compared to what you typically might find. And that is ultimately how my father was able to make 5-6 times more than the average pediatric gastroenterologist before we start the story.
Yeah, that's so important. Most of our listeners here are interested in getting into real estate investing, or already advanced in their real estate investing. And if they would just understand the importance of the SEO optimization and the Google reviews, like as an investor, people have to know that you're out there buying or selling assets. It's so
For
critical.
real. For real. It's of the utmost. It's basically everything. It's basically everything. If you can nail down those things, and so yeah, that's how we were able to get to that point when we actually start the story.
Excellent. All right, so let's fast forward. Crisis. Your dad saying, "Hey TJ, help! I have no idea how to bean count." Is pretty much what he was saying.
Yeah, basically. But it was like beyond that, like because my dad's, it was frustrating for my dad because he's about as close as you can get to a man with zero vices, right? The man does not. My dad doesn't drink a beer. My dad does not spend money on clothes. We do not have a crazy house. We didn't splurge growing up. I mean, I had a nice life, but like there was nothing that was like
Very frugal.
woo crazy, you know?
Yeah, very
Um,
frugal.
and so it was incredibly frustrating for him. I mean, if we were to track it out, right? One of the things that I show in the book, when I was born, I'm 28 years old. When I was born, my father was making $150,000 a year, right? $150,000 a year. And as you track things forward, okay, every 10 years, essentially, my father's salary doubled.
Wow.
Essentially, it doubled. That's why he didn't care, because he's like, well, I mean, I'm doubling. Like I 150,000, 300,000, 600,000, 1.2 million. Why should I care? I'm doing great. That's what he was thinking. That's where a lot of doctors sit at. And that's one of the main issues that we discuss in the book,
Yeah,
like why
it's
it's actually precarious.
yeah, it's not just doctors. There's a whole generation of people out there that the money's coming in and they don't give it a second thought of what to do with that money in case there's an emergency or a life-changing event like you went with your father. But I would say that the majority of high income earners are probably in that same category.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts. So um I have the statistic for you. So if you look at the data of life affluence dynamics, so that means like literally like throughout people's lives, how does their affluence change, right? There's a whole study on it. You can find it on Plus One. They show that in the United States of America, fully 12% of the population will become top 1% earners for 1 year of their life. Pretty insane. How is that even possible?
Wow.
12% of the population will become top 1% earners for 1 year in their life.
Wow.
And yet, only 0.6% of the population will be a top 1% earner for 10 years or more in their lives.
Some ebb and flow. People
Yeah.
coming in, keep people coming out. They're
Huge.
not able to sustain. They're not able to sustain their wealth.
Exactly. Huge shift in their lives. Think about all those people. They're thinking they made it. They're living the American dream. I'm a one percenter. This is amazing. I made it where nobody else did. From the 99% to the 1%. Out 11 out of 12 times. Pretty insane. And one of my theses that I present in the book is that doctors, it's almost worse. Because, and this is ironic, this is very ironic. The problem with doctors is that they are actually part of that 0.6%. So again, 12%, top 1%, we know 11 out of 12 times they're going to knock out, okay? And then there's that 0.06%. And I'm saying, well, doctors, they are overblown in their egos with regards to money because they're part of that 0.6%. And it is the only consistent trade school occupation. There's nothing else that can boast that number. I'm sorry, but not even tech, right? Not even tech. I know you were in chemical engineering. There's no such thing as like an actual pure, like guaranteed salary in chemical engineering. You don't even necessarily know. The average lawyer is going downwards in salary because of artificial intelligence. It's only doctors. And so I have this, what I call the thesis is basically, it's the Hunger Games theory, right? So these doctors, okay, and that's 0.6%. Everybody else in that 0.6%, they're like Hunger Games survivors. They understand to not be dumb and to invest something, or else they're going to be kicked out the way that most other people are. But doctors atrophy in their skills. They atrophy the money, the muscle of investing their money so that they can remain in that. And by the time their life is coming to an end, by the time they're in that position my dad was in, they're 55, they're 65, and it's running around the corner. They have no clue what to do, and they are horrified, absolutely horrified.
Yeah, there's one thing of thinking and knowing that you need to do something. Then once you get to the next stage of, well, now what the hell do I do with my money? And so the majority of those people that actually make a decision to start investing, they just throw it into the Russian roulette of the stock market, and they just give it to their
Yes.
401k, or they just throw it over there and they just say, somebody else, my fund manager will manage it for me. And that's not investing. That's not predictable. So I mean, that's why we're starting this podcast series, and that's why we're doing this, is to educate our listeners out there that there are so many other ways to build and grow and sustain your wealth. Exactly what you're
Hmm.
talking about.
Exactly. Exactly, man. So, we go back into the story and basically what happened. Okay. So we're out here. My dad had flown over here to Texas, and I basically I basically told him, I said, Dad, look, I really thought about your situation. I thought about everything that was going on, right? I went on Amazon, I looked up some of the books about investing for doctors. Because honestly, Dad, like, this is actually the opening to the book. The opening to the book is the exact things that I told my dad. I basically said, Dad, honestly, um, I could sit here and hear you out everything that you have to say about woe is me and all this other stuff, but like at the end of the day, you got to stop playing a victim, and we have to admit, like, you just made some mistakes, like you just acted dumb. Like the particular context was he was basically blaming his skin color, and he was blaming my mom, and he was blaming the fact that he paid for my school, and he was blaming all this other stuff. He's like, if I wouldn't have done that, and all this other, and I said it was the first time I had ever in my life, I love my father. It was the first time I was ever like, Dad, shut up. Like, honestly, just shut up. I'd never done it. I'd never done it. It wasn't because it was trying to, like, it wasn't out of like disrespect. It was more just like, no, like, actually, like, this is bad. Like we're at a precarious scenario. Like, you're gonna die, so you need to shut up. Like, this is not okay. And so I said, look, I went on Amazon. I looked at all these different books out there for you. I'm already annoyed enough that you, throughout my whole life, you never even once picked up a book about investing. I don't even care if it's a bad book. Just pick up a book, but you didn't even so much as do that. But I'll give you this. I looked at the books for doctors, and they're a joke. They're a complete and total farce. They're not the right thing for a person in your situation. If you were my age, fine, it's reasonable. But we are way past that point. Their strategies essentially are what you were talking about. They were like, okay, so what you're going to do is, you're making $300,000, so you're going to live off of only like $80,000 every single year. No one's gonna do that. Okay, nobody's making $300,000 gonna go back to living 75, $80,000. Sorry, I don't really believe that that's a majority type piece of advice. So just live off of $80,000. Put your money into the S&P 500. Wait 20 to 30 years. That's their advice in all those other books. So I'm like, Dad, you don't have 20 to 30 years. This isn't going to work. So here's what I'm going to do. I've gone ahead. I learned a bunch of different things. I'm going to show you just everything that I know. Okay. These are the best things that I know. These are not typical things. I'm not going to pretend like I'm the most genius investor in the history of the world. I'm not going to pretend like I know everything, but I do know that for you in your situation, in your exact context, being 63 years old, needing something by the end of the decade or else, this is the best strategy that we can do moving forward. And you're going to simply say, okay, son, I'm going to just go with you and just do it. You're going to not question it. You're not going to, argue back. We're just going to do it. Just very simply, we're going to do it. And that's what we did. That's what we go into throughout the rest of the book.
So after you said that, did he smack you over the head a couple times?
No, he didn't, because he knew it was coming from a place of love, right? If I was trying to be vindictive or something like that, or actually like try to like be mean to him, like, yeah, that'd be terrible. But he knew that, like, number one, he'd asked because he knew enough that he knew a couple of things. He knew, okay, number one, I'd managed to start doing incredibly well in my life. Like I'd gone from in a matter of 2 years, gone from living in his garage and creating my company, my marketing company out of his garage, to living in a 3,500 square foot house with my wife. You know, doing like very, very, very well, making money off of different investments in cryptos and all sorts of different areas. And he was just like, okay, like you know something, you know, and he also felt that basically he felt embarrassed to go to his friends. B, his friends didn't know anything either. C, if he went to like higher end advice, it was too over the top. Like it would just go, and if he were to talk to his like wife about it, like she's not gonna, or sorry, not his wife, but his girlfriend about it, she didn't really know. So he just knew at the very least, like we can have a one-on-one man talk, me and him as a son. I actually even mentioned in the book that that was one of the first times that we had like a real pure, like not simply father son, but actual just man-to-man conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting that the more stories I hear about people getting in crisis like this and getting out of crisis, there's always that connection with somebody, that network, a friend, a mentor, a son in your case, that provides the help. It's just there's so many of us that we don't know what we don't know unless we have somebody there that can guide us through it.
It's true. I mean, I sit here and I'm a smart guy. I heard your story, chemical engineering background. You're a smart guy. Like that, like you could have the highest IQ in the world. Some of this stuff you still could never figure out on your own. Simple as that. Some of this stuff you could still never find out on your own.
Yeah,
It's so important.
and the first thing that I tell people when they start asking me, "Hey, Jeremy, how do I get into real estate?" I just say, here, you gotta start reading. And so I have my books here. I got my books over there. You got to read. You got to listen to these podcasts. You got to start getting your friends. You got to start surrounding yourself with the right people that are going to take you from that position that your dad was in, out of that pit, and into something successful. But it all starts right here, reading your books and surrounding yourself with the right people.
Absolutely. I mean, I have right here. This is you see this? This is like a 2 terabyte drive
Wow.
of just information, just books, sources, podcasts, like anything that I know, like YouTube series, anything that I can find. Not only do I try to watch it, I try to archive it just in case it gets banned. And some stuff has, I would say, like at least 500 gigabytes worth of stuff that's in here that I can pass on to my kids. That's going to be the real difference maker for my kids, not college, not university. 500 gigabytes of stuff that's in here has been censored or banned on the internet. And it's that 500 gigs that ends up being that big difference maker.
Yep. That's excellent. So yeah, let's keep telling the story. What can you share about what happened next?
Okay, yeah. So basically how I broke it down for my dad and how I break things down in my book is I said, look, okay, up to this point, we've made the same mistakes again and again and again. And these mistakes get in the way of you even having the money to start investing in the first place. So before we even talk about all these fun, crazy things, that I showed him, that I end up showing people in the book, and I really do show things that I'm not exaggerating. I personally paid 15, 20, $30,000 to join masterminds to learn, right? Before you get into all that other stuff, it's like we got to stop. We got to really, really stop these 5 mistakes. These 5 mistakes that are keeping you and doctors across the country stuck in the middle class. There's a reason that we all know doctors are at best high upper middle class, okay? And this is why. These are the big difference makers.
Can you share
And
what
so I
some of
went
those?
through.
Can you
Yeah,
share
absolutely.
some of those mistakes are?
So the first one that I showed him was the difference between rich and wealthy, right? Literally just from the beginning, because that's the first mistake that doctors do. They think, okay, I'm rich, therefore I'm wealthy, so I'm fine, right? That's where my dad was sitting at. We have to even define these terms. So I ultimately showed him, I said, look, rich is your income compared to a given group of people. So it's you versus everybody else. And it's going to change depending on the lens of what people were talking about. So you could be rich compared to the rest of the world, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're rich compared to everybody else within a country club. Generally speaking, when we're referring to rich, we are talking about the top 1 to 2% of a given group. So for the purposes of the conversation, we're going to choose the group of the United States of America and say that the top 1 to 2% doctors do meet that criteria. Okay. There's multiple pieces of evidence for this. Number one, accreditation. Most doctors are accredited, right? Accreditation means you earn more than $200,000 a year as your income, or your household earns $300,000 a year, or you own $1 million of assets. That's a literal legal cutoff point. We physically define that cutoff to say you are rich enough to invest in certain assets. And if you don't meet that cutoff point, you might not be qualified to be able to handle these assets and their volatilities and their risks. We literally created that term. That's an actual thing. But then the other aspect of it is that when we look at it, if we look at age ranges, right, you can look at, okay, what about rich compared to different ages? And doctors are in the top 1% at age 25. Like once they become doctors from age 25 to age 30, okay, they're in the top 1% pretty much automatically as soon as they become attendings. And then as they grow upwards in their career, they move upwards and they will basically remain in that top 1 to 2%. So that's rich. And I said, Dad, but the problem is you keep thinking because you're part of that 0.6%, you're good, you're fine, you're wealthy. And that's not the same. What it actually means to be wealthy is it's a comparison between the passive income that you're making and your lifestyle costs. And the essential idea is if a man could just, essentially stop working, minimize it almost entirely to the point that the work he does do, the hours put in don't really correlate to the salary the way that it does with sweat income, with active income. When you get to that point, okay, if you can make that passive income more than your lifestyle costs for 10 years or more, then we're actually talking about wealth. Okay.
So what was his response to that? Had he ever heard that concept before?
Never before in his life.
Wow.
My father grew up in Puerto Rico, okay, in a slum of Puerto Rico where dead serious, statistically more dangerous than being a soldier in Iraq. I don't mean that in any like.
My dad's from Arecibo. My dad grew up in Arecibo.
Mira eso, yeah. So you know what I'm
Boricua,
talking. Like, there's some areas that are bad. Like my father, like 3 of my father's uncles have been shot. Okay, directly. Okay, my father's brother, went off into crack cocaine. It's a place called Sabana Seca in Toa Baja. Okay. Right. So it was like right outside of a military base. But that went defunct, and it's just like it's like a ghetto. My dad went to a junior college, and when he wanted to become a doctor, the teacher literally said, like, just forget about it. People don't become doctors from here. They don't do it. And he literally, when he was a kid, he literally thought, if I become a doctor, I can be paid in chickens. That was a real story.
So where did he go to get his doctorate at?
So what he did was he finished up his junior college and then was able to use those credits, which is crazy. He basically had doubled down on his major, even though it was a junior college, to then apply those credits, and then ended up going to University of Oklahoma. So so he went over to Oklahoma, and then he didn't know anything about English, and then he was still able to make his way through. Just crazy how hard the man worked.
So yeah, your dad's that's pretty successful, going from slum in Puerto Rico, University of Oklahoma, getting a doctorate.
That's what I'm saying. That's why it's important to make this distinction, because I was like, Dad, it's not, the issue here is not that you're successful. You are an inspiration. That's the frustrating part. But you never learn this stuff. You never learn this stuff.
So I'm going to just jump right in. There's a difference between your dad and my dad in that my dad got the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, back in 1995, right when it came out, and he immediately knew that the content in there was going to be life-changing. So he got it, and so whenever he would drop me off to high school, in the car, he would drop me off to school every day, and he would put in a cassette tape. He would make
that's so good.
He would make me listen to Rich Dad Poor Dad Robert Kiyosaki on the way to school, on the way back. And so every day I'm listening about how the importance of cash flow, the importance of getting out of the rat race. So and so as I think I was freshman in high school at that time. So freshman in high school, that was already instilling in me that I need to get out of the rat race. I need to have my expenses down, my cash flow from the investments coming up. So my dad made me listen to that. So that's
props to him.
One Puerto Rican strategy versus another Puerto Rican strategy.
Yeah.
The thing with my dad though is that it was more like, do what I say, but not what I do. So he never invested in real estate the whole time. So like, I guess he was just waiting for his son to do it later on. But
yeah, but that's still, I mean, seriously though, props to him at the very least for introducing you to that. I mean, I watched your video the other, earlier where you're talking about like, you almost, there's some things that you hate in the book. Like for example, the mischaracterization of what passive income actually is. And I agree largely, people. Hello, can you see me?
there you go.
Okay.
Keep going.
It's for marketing purposes, the way that they try to say it, like, oh, like literally speaking, you physically don't do anything while generating passive income.
Right.
Let's not talk about the analytics. Let's not talk about due diligence. Let's not talk about gathering the funds in the first place or going to lenders or let's not talk about any of that. It's literally you sit there doing nothing. That is, but at the same time, I mean, that would be almost more than anything you would learn in school, typically. So yeah. So I remember when I showed my dad that, he was blown away. He was just blown away. He was like, I've never heard this. Like I had to explain to him the very concept of passive income, like just the very concept of here's active income and here is passive income. And this is what an asset, he didn't know what an asset meant. He did not know what that meant at all, period. Never, he said, I'd heard of it. What does that actually mean? And look at the difference. So we just talked about, your dad teaching or influencing you with Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I swear to God, my daughter, I have a book. It's from authors called the Tuttle Twins. Okay. It's called the Tuttle Toddlers ABCs. And it's the ABCs of economics. Okay. I'm not kidding around. She's 1.5 years old. The very first letter is A. A is for assets.
There you go.
Assets are things that you can buy, own, or sell. The difference with assets are whether they make you a profit or they cost you money. And then later it shows L, liabilities. The difference between 63 learning that versus 1.5 physically learning your ABCs. Yep. Massive. So yeah, that was the first secret that I showed my dad. Then the second thing we talked about was like, okay, how do you actually calculate what your passive income is? I call it, I didn't have a good word for it because I find, retirement, it's like, no, it's like beyond just like thinking retirement. I just call it wealth point, right? How do you actually figure out what your wealth point is? And I show that in the book. The essential answer is, what you're going to do is you're going to add up the cost of your home, your cars, every major purchase that you're going to be making. And you also factor in things like emergencies. Okay, this was an important talking point. So I remember my dad, we paused and we stopped about this point because I was like, Dad, this right here, this is why I got mad at you earlier. This is the issue here. Because he was like, okay, I get it. I'm going to add up all of my housing and my cars and all this other stuff. But TJ, the problem is we would have these emergencies. So these are the emergencies. So there was a car accident once that was $100,000 because my sister crashed my dad's Porsche. And then there was another issue that was like another weird legal trouble with like essentially a malpractice suit. That was like a weird situation. There was another situation with my mother in a car, all sorts of different things. He's like, TJ, how do I take into account these emergencies? I was like, the problem is you're complaining to me about how you didn't take into account emergencies, but that is itself the issue. You didn't just account for emergencies, period. Like there should just be an area that says all emergencies. We're going to just have something for all emergencies, period. What he was doing instead, this is what a lot of people do. He would have the emergency pop up, had nothing on the side, then refinance the home or take out a loan to pay off the thing. Right. And so he's losing money. So I broke down, okay, this is how you can save up enough to be able to have 3 to 6 months worth of emergencies. How do we have done that? Basically taking 15% off the tops, keeping that over just for the emergencies, and just knowing that it's for emergencies. You can easily generate 3 to 6 months salary, no matter what your salary is, every 1.5 to 3 years.
Nice.
So that if we look at those emergencies that happened, it was 1.5 to 3 years. Like, something would happen, wait 3 years, there was something else, wait 3 years, there was something else. So one of the bonuses that I include in the book, and by the way, if you guys go to wealthydoctorsecrets.com, you can get this, okay? I'm giving you the book for free. I just ask that you pay shipping and handling, I don't make a profit. It's literally printing the book, shipping it to your house. I give bonus calculators, including how to calculate your wealth point, including I have 4 due diligence checklists. I have a 50 video online course waiting for you, all these different things. So anyways, I showed him how to calculate it and how to actually figure out what his wealth point would be. For my dad, when we looked at everything, we determined that his portfolio, his wealth point, would be him making a passive income of $240,000 a year. And that would equate to a portfolio valued at about $5.5 million. If we can get to that point, we're golden. That's our North Star. That's what we're trying to make decisions based off of. If we're looking at, should we do this investment, this other investment, we know what we're trying to get to at the very least. And now we can make that right decision. And so that's the second secret that I talk about in the book. By the way, is this good stuff, or am I boring you?
Whenever you're talking about that, what comes to my mind is not only are so many people are uneducated about what is an asset and where to find assets or where to get involved in and where to invest in real estate. That's one thing, but what comes to my mind is we're at the very basics of people that are bringing in a lot of money, like your dad, have no clue on even how to budget. Just
no clue.
Basic budgeting. Like, what is each different category? Let's just set some goals. Let's set some goals for emergencies, for savings. Like, that's the type of basic stuff that we're talking about. Very educated doctors, lawyers, and etc. Ask them to say, hey, let me see your budget for the last month or for this coming month.
My dad had no clue. He's no idea. And when I talk to doctors, I mean, that's what I work with all day. They basically say, yeah, they went through medical school. There was no classes on it, and they basically, I mean, just imagine. So you're in medical school, and the entire time you're basically going to be you're like a hermit, right? You are just studying. You barely have enough focus and attention for maybe one relationship, your future wife, your future husband. That's about it. You're not going to really hang out with friends other than your friends in medical school. That's it for the next 3 years. Then you enter residency, where you are bottom dog. You are a bottom feeder. You do what they tell you to. You are going to have 24-hour shifts. You are going to be doing one thing that's uncomfortable after another. You're going to go rotate from one specialty that you like to another specialty that you don't like, again and again and again. And you're learning on the job, where every mistake that you do is hurting someone's life forever, every single time. So that whole time, they're not going to be thinking to themselves, okay, well, what I'm going to do is let me analyze these charts. Let me learn technical analysis here. Let me take this whole extra online, because they're just exhausted.
Yeah. It's the same thing. It was the same thing for me, even going through chemical engineering. In chemical engineering, we got to do so many analysis, so many equations, so many calculators and spreadsheets. But where's the one on budgeting your own finances? It just doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Not
or important question, like, for example, right now, it's for the first time in the history of the United States, private practices have become the minority. So at any other given year, more than 50% of private practice, more than 50% of the physicians you would see are private practice physicians. They own their business. But after 2020, that's no longer the case. Why? Because they don't understand what you're talking about. They don't understand the budgeting. They don't understand the accounting. And they sure as heck don't understand the marketing.
Yep.
And so their concern is, again, they've been so overwhelmed by everything else. They can't keep up with any of it. They can't even begin to keep up with any of it.
All right. So I don't want to give away, the listeners, to give away what happens in your book, but I guess is there anything that you want to share about kind of where your dad is now and how things have played
Yeah.
out?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I ultimately showed my dad, once we cleared away the things that were crushing his cash flow and his ability to apply capital, was I showed him the difference between hope-based investing and process-driven investing. And that is the main thesis of the rest of the book, right? Once we've cleared enough cash. And again, I talk about inflation. I talk about loans, we're actually sourcing loans. I talk about all sorts of different things to be able to get that capital in the first place. I say, okay, let's actually discuss the actual placement of the capital. What do you want to look for? And I say, look, Dad, the problem is, sure, there's the confusion about this stuff, but the other thing is there's fear. Because you know what? There's a lot of people that I know that are actually really dumb. They're very rich, okay? They're doing very, very well. And that's because they're so dumb that they almost don't have, they don't have the fear to just get started, right? And that's because they understand this difference, right? So what is this difference? What a hope-based investing is when you put your money in and you wait there and you pray and you hope that the market works out in your favor. You don't actually know whether the day that you put your money in was the good day to put your money in. You don't actually know if the day you take your money out is a good day to take your money out. You don't know why it rose in value. You don't know why it lowered in value. You don't know why it might, be consistent in value. You don't know who to hold accountable. You don't know what to do if someone does something terrible. Was it a tweet that changed the value of your asset?
Yeah.
Was it a law that changed the value of your asset? Was it a marketing campaign that changed the value of your asset? Was it some whale that is trying to rip up the market to rip it downwards again the second you think it's a good time to buy? Or is it a whale ripping it downwards to get a bunch of schmucks to buy in before he rips it away? You have no idea. And that's the issue with hope-based investments. And the question is, with hope-based investments, which one am I talking about? Am I talking about crypto? Or am I talking about, the latest hot stock tip from Motley Fool? Or even am I talking about a lot of housing plays that a lot of people make? I bought my house. It's like, okay, that's great, but like you have no control over what's actually going on in the housing market. You're just buying the house. It's different from a stock, but you're just sitting there hoping and praying. Hopefully nothing bad happens in your town. Hopefully there's no murders. Hopefully there's no, we don't know. Meanwhile, the secret that I showed him was process-driven investments. I said, Dad, all the, the richest people that I know. And the secret here is that my father, he worked so hard so that I could have opportunities he never had. This is another reason why he trusted me, because I said, Dad, you invested in me already. Now it's time. I literally said the words, now it's time to get a return on your investment that you put into me. That's the exact thing. That's why he didn't slap me over the head. You asked earlier, it's because I said that, okay? He sent me to the most expensive private school in the entirety of South Florida, okay? This private school, it costs more than most people's college tuition. My friends, they had 500 million to their name, like for real. One of them is considered a black Donald Trump, essentially. Like you can literally put in black Donald Trump, you'll see my friend's dad. And that we would hang out with one-on-one dinners, it was just normal. So I said, look, Dad, all these guys, they do process-driven investments. When they invest, they already know the one variable. They can't guarantee that they're going to be making money on a given investment. They can't fit because nobody is clairvoyant, but they know the exact variable for what has to happen in order for that investment to make a huge uptick in value. So it could be, and I give examples, I say it could be a business acquisition play, and the one variable is that you acquire the business, and what we're going to do is we're going to change the management so that it's no longer rated off of something called the SDE. It's going to be off of something called the EBITDA, and I discussed in the book what that actually is, okay? And that's going to change something called a sales multiple, Dad. And that basically is going to increase the value of that business. They know that variable for a fact. Did they change the management? Did they not? Did the sales multiple increase? Did it not? That's it. And the start date, we will do this in the next 2 years, period. Okay, that's it. Or it might be a real estate play. A great example I give, and that is related to Axe Decentralized Real Estate, is land development. So at Axe, what we do is we're very alternative, very, very hyper alternative. What we do is we acquire large ranches across the highway from Houston to Dallas, large ranches. We're talking about 500 acres plus with fertile soils, water, and great grasses. And what we do is we subdivide those properties and sell them as off-grid ranches. Now, with regards to what we do at Axe, the reason it's a process-driven investment is that the one variable is, can we acquire this land and subdivide it, get it approved for platting, right? That's a whole thing. I talk about in the book, what is platting approval? Why is it so valuable? Upon platting approval and rezoning distribution, that itself is able to multiply the value of that property for nothing else. We haven't done construction. We haven't done it. It's just, did you get the thing subdivided or not? And we're going to take the next 9 months to subdivide it as an example. And so by doing those types of plays, it simplifies everything. And he's able to make a huge multiple compared to what he would be able to do in the S&P 500 or anywhere else. That's essentially the main idea.
Well, there was a lot to unpack there in the last couple of minutes that you're talking about. We're talking about hope-based versus process-driven investments. We're talking about now your new endeavor with Axe for off-grid purchases. So I guess with those, what were some of the ones that your dad said, all right, yes, let's go for this one, this one, this one, and so how did they play out?
So ultimately, the irony is that my dad had already made one process-driven investment before he even knew anything about really investing. To him, he never thought of it as an investment until I explained it to him. And that was the acquisition of his business, right? The acquisition, that is an actual, because I basically break it down and I say, look, there's three main things that you can look at, which are going to be right now. There's some cryptocurrency plays, although they're iffy because a lot of them you can't really control. So ultimately, what you're going to focus on are business acquisition plays and real estate plays. My dad had made a business acquisition play, and I was like, here's how we can really expand that. And that is how he was able to set up a base. And I say, so business acquisitions can be some of the fastest ways to build wealth in the first place because of their speed. However, they're not as repeatable the way that you can systematize things. I mean, you've done over $500 million system. Clearly, you have a system for how you're dispositioning real estate. So then, once you've built it, real estate is able to create that stability. And so I showed him, look, what you want to do is you want to find a hope-based real estate play. And what he did was he took initially he'd actually basically ran a campaign. He made an extra $100,000. So he was starting with zero. He made an extra 100. Showed him how to leverage that, how to be able to take things out so that he could find an extra 200. So he could build it to 250,000, and then he invested it into a property with his business. So him and his partners, they said, okay, what we're going to do is we are going to acquire a building. So they were in a 1,500 square foot office as a pediatric gastroenterology office. They bought a 20,000 square foot former rooms to go building, and then changed it and got it through land development and land usage and land platting, all these other things. And that substantially increased the value of this property. They're able to rent it out, do some rentals for other commercial people. And essentially the point is here, Dad took $250,000, and now that the value of what he has in that is worth $2.1 million. Wow. That's the main idea. And it was from him. It was from that night. He literally says, I just followed what you were saying, and that's what was able to do it.
Yeah. So that is process driven investment versus hope, because the hope, I want to go back to what you're talking about, the hope based. We are hoping that somebody doesn't make a tweet, or that there's not a bombing on this part of the world that impacts the markets going up and down. And that's why I like the process-driven investment, is because it's very, very localized to the market. So wherever that rooms to go warehouse was, it's processed because there are certain market rates around that area that people need. The businesses need to rent out that commercial space. And so you can easily find out what the market rates are going for and how to subdivide it out, put it on the market and say, come rent out my building. That's predictable. That's predictable, and it's process driven. And then it all comes back to that EBITDA. It's the net operating income divided by the cap rate equals your value. So you're increasing the rental rates or the rental income of that building. And now you take that 200,000, you 10x it up to 2 million. And that's what I do. That's what I love. And that's why so many people love real estate investing.
Exactly, exactly. And it was just, again, he's not like he's not worried about that Elon Musk tweet. He's got an objective measure. That's the nice thing about it. And that by having shown him that, it eliminated a lot of the fear that he'd had about investing. You know, it eliminated the confusion of like, what variables? It's like, no, look, it's like, look at this market rate. Like, you do the thing. And then the fear of like, oh, but what if, but no, look, you've got so much padding here with all this that it ends up being favorable. Like, even in the worst case scenario, it still ends up being very, very favorable.
I love it. So what's next for TJ?
Yeah, so right now I am 100% focused on getting the book Wealthy Doctor Secrets into the hands of doctors.
Love it.
And it's not just doctors, it's any high income professionals who are listening to this or who might be interested in this. I'm giving the book away for free. Again, I just need the only thing I ask is just the printing costs and the shipping costs. The goal is to first goal is get that book into 1,000 doctors' hands. I know that right before this podcast, we talked about the value provided. I know for a fact, doctors, you read this book, you're going to want to work with us. You're going to want to be a part of what we're building. I have no actual ask, nothing to sell. I just want to build wealth with you, right? And we have process-driven investments in that. So the goal is get it into 1,000 people's hands. 10% of them decide to actually take action, right? 80-20-ish rule here, right? So 10%, 20% decide to take action. That's 100 to 200 investors right then and there. That is the main focus right now.
Love it. All right. So where can we get the book at?
It's wealthydoctorsecrets.com. Again, wealthydoctorsecrets.com. And I've got the free book waiting for you right in there. You just put in your information, you can go ahead and get it. Plus, you get the bonuses, including the calculators. There's the 50 video online course and the audiobook that I personally, as the author, recorded myself here in studio.
Excellent. Well, TJ, it was awesome having you on this podcast, and I need to have you back. I want to go deep in Acts, and I want to understand more about that. So hopefully one time I can have you back on. We can talk about decentralized off-grid real estate, because I want to go deep in that.
Absolutely. And I'd love to invite you onto my podcast. I want to pick your brain and learn from you. You have so much experience, and hear about different things that you've seen out there in the trenches. And yeah, this was wonderful to be on.
Awesome. Well, that's a wrap for this episode of Wealth Building Strategies podcast. See you next time.